I'm going to go ahead and I just started the recording. And if you've got the music, I'll start the webinar.
All right. Oh.
No worries.
Kyle, I believe you're muted. We missed all your wonderful opening remarks. Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties to start. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to LocalLit 2022. My name is Kyle Burkett, and I am a senior librarian with the San Jose Public Library. I manage the King Public Reference and Resources Department at the Martin Luther King Jr. Library in downtown San Jose. For those of you who are not familiar with this program, LocalLit is an annual author fair and showcase created in partnership between the San Jose Public Library and San Jose State University. Due to the ongoing pandemic, we have elected to host this program virtually for the third year in a row, but we hope to be able to host next year's event in person once again. In just a moment, we will have opening remarks from both our Dean of the SJSU Library, Michael Meth, and the Deputy Director of the San Jose Public Library, Michelle Ornaud. And then that will be followed by our three author panels. Every author participating in the panel today will have 2 to 3 minutes to share a bit about themselves and their work. And then afterwards, there will be a 20 to 30 minute long discussion panel. So feel free, if you're attending from home, ask questions. You can go ahead and use the Q&A question and answer Zoom box that is located in the bottom of your screen. Before we get started, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the Muwekma Aulwan tribe, whose land we currently occupy. The San Jose community recognizes that the present-day Muwekma Aulwan tribe, with an enrolled Bureau of Indian Affairs documented membership of over 550, is comprised of all the known surviving American Indian lineages aboriginal to the San Francisco Bay region, who trace their ancestry through the missions Santa Clara, San Jose, and Dolores during the advent of the Hispano-European Empire into Alta California, and who are the successors and living members of the sovereign, historic, previously federally recognized Verona Band of the Alameda County. Furthermore, the San Jose community recognizes that the city is established within the Tamian Aulwan speaking tribal ethno-historic territory, which, based upon the unratified federal treaties of 1851 and 1852, includes the unceded ancestral lands of the Muwekma Aulwan tribe of the San Francisco Bay Area. Some of the enrolled Muwekma lineages are descended from the direct ancestors from the Tamian Aulwan tribal territory, whose ancestors had affiliation with Mission Santa Clara. The San Jose community also recognizes the importance of this land to the indigenous Muwekma Aulwan people of this region, and consistent with our principles of community and diversity, strives to be good stewards on behalf of the Muwekma Aulwan tribe whose land we occupy. All right, so without further ado, I would like to introduce San Jose State University Dean of Library, Michael Meth, and the San Jose Public Library Deputy Director, Michelle Ornat, to say a few words to get us started.
Thank you, Kyle. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to LocalLit 2022. My name is Mike Meth, and I'm the Dean of the San Jose State University Library. LocalLit is a wonderful celebration of San Jose authors and their voices. This partnership that we just mentioned between San Jose State University and San Jose Public Library is now in its 10th year, which is remarkable. And it helps us celebrate local authors and see through their eyes how we celebrate the local community, the culture, and how we help create a unique sense of place in San Jose. Seeing this broad range of communities and stories is just really, really, truly outstanding. As you can see from the programming, we support all types of writers, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, academic research, fantasy, mystery, etc., through this partnership. And we're really excited to bring this event today to our community. And as you see, it's also being recorded, so others will be able to join who can't make it today and catch up on these stories. In general, I just want to say now I'm entering my second year in San Jose, and it's been just really remarkable to be a member of this community, to be a member of this partnership between the public library and the university library, and to also be here with my family. And as I look out my window, I see a lot of rain, which is also quite remarkable. So I think this is an auspicious time to host this wonderful event. And congratulations to all the authors and the organizers. And I look forward to catching up with your stories and hearing the talks. Thank you very much. Take care. And over to Michelle, your turn.
Thanks, Mike. Welcome, everybody. So as Mike said, this is a great partnership between San Jose Public Library and also the university. And with this, we really seek to amplify the voices of the people who are writing, and also to create space for local authors to engage with the community. And although, SJSU and SJPL are different organizations, we are united in learning and education and in celebrating these local voices and the impact that they're having on our community. SJPL and the university library, we love to partner with authors by providing physical space in which you all can work and connect with resources, research like the California Room and the university special collections. We have skill building workshops. There are peer groups like Veterans of Life Write, and also programs like National Novel Writing Month. In addition to LocalLit, the library helps create opportunities to share creative work through short edition platform, the Spring into Poetry contest, the Fall into Fiction contest, and as well as the graphic novel making contest. Libraries more than ever are critical to providing access to literature research, and an array of creative works to help people thrive through challenging times. And in all times, we invite everybody in our community to explore and use our wide array of resources. Our staff are available to help authors innovate, adapt to technological and other real-world issues as they research, create, and engage in the business of writing and in the process of sharing their work with the world. I'm really proud to be part of this event. This is my 5th Local Lit, which I can't believe. And welcome to everybody, all the authors and all the participants that are going to get to see this great work today. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Michael. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. We couldn't do this without y'all, so we appreciate you. Next, I think we're going to pass it over to the moderator of our first panel today, who is San Jose State Librarian Essie Barroso Ramirez, and she's going to introduce our first group of authors. So Essie, take it away.
Hi, thank you, Kyle. Okay, so I'd like to welcome and introduce our first panel, consisting of Robert Ovitz, Mahendra Kumar Doshi, AJ Faz, Kathleen Ann Gonzalez, and Elizabeth Jimenez Montelongo. And we will, if you'd like to, next slide, please, Natasha. We'll go ahead and get started with Robert. Welcome, and Robert, please go ahead.
I'm not able to turn on the video.
No, you can just go ahead and speak while your slide is up. Oh, you mean your camera?
Right. Yeah, the camera. Hi, I'm Robert Ovitz, and I am a senior lecturer in political science in the Master's in Public Administration program at San Jose State University. Thank you for having me, and thank you for being here. My book, We the Elites, is really an attempt to try to deal with 3 of the myths that we learn about the U.S. Constitution growing up in the United States. There we go. Hopefully that works. All right.
Great.
These 3 myths I'm going to talk about just for a couple of minutes are that the U.S. Constitution established a system of government that we could call a democracy, and that the Constitution establishes rights for people. And then lastly, that our system works by majority rule. So throughout my book, I address these 3 different myths by looking at how the framers saw the system at the time, our first Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, and the different threats that elites faced at that time. The first myth that we often learn from as early as elementary school is that the framers established a system of democracy. But when you study the letters and the memos and the transcripts of the debates and of the Constitutional Convention and the ratifying conventions of the states, you find that often the framers of the Constitution, what many might call the founding fathers, were actually quite pessimistic and hostile to democracy. They referred to the common people as the many, or the meaner sort, or the people out of doors, the people who did hard, dirty labor. And the last thing they wanted was to have these common people with their hands on the lever of power. In Federalist Paper number 10, James Madison described democracies as ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, and ever been found incompatible with the personal security or the rights of property. And so for this reason, the system that was designed provides more rights for property, particularly at that time, slave owners, those who owned large tracts of land, and particularly those who did business and still had unpaid outstanding loans that they were expecting the new government to repay them. So our system ends up with more rights for property than it ends up with rights for people. Very few rights in the Articles. The first rights beyond those few will come with the Bill of Rights. And then lastly, that the Constitution establishes a system of majority rule, but the design of the system is to actually slow down, constrain political democracy and prevent economic democracy by putting in the way of majority rule various roadblocks and impediments. So those are 3 basic myths of our Constitution that my book deals with. And from there, I turned it back over to you, Essie. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Robert. So up next, we will have Mahendra Kumar Doshi. with Surat to San Francisco. Go ahead, please.
Well, hi, I'm Mahendra Doshi. I live in San Jose, and I have been in this country for last 55 years. I studied in the University of Nevada in history, and I also studied journalism, and I have been writing for the ethnic papers for last so many years. Since retiring in about 10 years ago, I thought I contribute something to our knowledge. And I selected the subject, the Patels. Now, if you go anywhere in the United States and you rent a little motel or a big hotel, chances are that it will be owned by a guy called Patels. And 70% of all the hotels in America is owned by the Patels. So that led me to find out how this unique business run by Patel started. So I went into archive, but there was nothing about them. So I did the oral interview, about 160 people, went everywhere in Texas, California, Idaho. And wherever there was a Patel, I tried to find out about him or his ancestor. And after 8 years of research, I published this book. It traces the history of how these three Patels who were actually are not allowed to come to the United States in 1920s and 1930s because there were laws that barred Asians from coming here. So these people went to Trinidad first and came via a small boat, got a one-day visa, and then disappeared into the farms of Sacramento Valley. And then when the Japanese were interned, one enterprising and visionary Patel got his hotel, a single room occupancy hotel, very dilapidated. He paid $300 down payment and $75 a month. And then how he started. And then he introduced all his friends to the hotel business. They moved to San Francisco. In the south of Market, they occupied more than 30 hotels by 1960. And by 1970, they got into the motels business, and they would buy any motel that was available. Very enterprising, they help each other. And my book tells their story. And a very important segment of a society so far has not been written about. And so I did, and that's what it tells. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahendra. Next we have Kathleen. Oh, I'm sorry. Next we have AJ Faz. Go ahead, AJ.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is AJ Foss, and I'm a cultural anthropologist here at San Jose State University. And I'm here to talk about my new book, In the Shadow of Tungurahua, Disaster Politics in Highland, Ecuador. That's Tungurahua. People outside of Quechua-speaking regions in the Andes often struggle with that. And I frequently point out that it is one of several unpronounceable volcanoes in my lab. And so this work is based on many things, and there's a whole lot of stories going on in this. It's based on over 10 years of my field work, living and working with folks in a canton or region known as Penipe in the Andean highlands of Ecuador. And the book is broken up into three main parts that are intended to really destabilize and transform how we think about disasters, how we think about forms of human cooperation, and ultimately how we think about natures. And I say that in the plural for reasons that would be clear after reading the book. So the first part of the book begins with eruptions of this volcano, Tungurahua, in 1999, and these really chaotic eruptions and evacuations that people were experiencing. And then what I do is I move quickly to zoom out And I do a critical history of this region to illustrate how it's really helpful to think about this as a 500-year disaster in the making that is the product of colonial settlements and politics in the Andes and a lot of post-colonial politics in the Andes. And then I return to the present day, still in part one, or present day, turn of the 21st century, where I follow where people went for the periods of time that they were displaced for nearly 10 years, thousands of people from these campesino and indigenous villages around the volcano, and how they finally made their way back home to their villages in 2006, only to face another massive eruption and a series of evacuations. I arrive in 2009 as they build and come to inhabit these new resettlements away from the volcano. And there's a whole bunch of really tricky humanitarian politics in those contexts. And I start living and working with people there beginning in 2009. And the part one sort of ends with a lot of the troubling and unsettling sort of politics and ecologies of those resettlements. Part two is a critical look at cooperation in disasters, particularly a very, very, very old, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of year old tradition known as Minga, and how people work together to build their communities, their infrastructures, and their environments, and to take care of one another. But it's also complicated by the fact that the state and all these humanitarian agencies also want to work through Minga. And in doing so, they transform it into sort of a colonial relation. Finally, to conclude in part three, the theme of part three is called convivir, which is typically translated into English as coexist, but I mean it very literally as co-living, or at least my friends in Penipe do. And it's an argument for being able to develop their own relationships with the volcano and with the landscape and with a whole multi-species world around the volcano that really transforms how we think about disaster and living with things we often consider hazards. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it for now. Thank you very much.
Kathleen Ann Gonzalez.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today and giving me this chance to talk about my latest work. Though I was born and raised here in Santa Clara and San Jose, I've lived here my whole life. For a couple of decades now, I've had a special relationship with Venice, Italy, and just fell in love with the place, connected with many people in many different ways, and started writing biographies and historical nonfiction works about Venice. Well, in late 2019, there was a historic flood where most of the city was under feet of water. And then just a couple months later, as they were recuperating from that, there was the lockdown, the pandemic. And, you know, it hit Italy really hard and people were really stuck in their homes. So Venice went from this place of being having over tourism and a lot of degradation of the natural environment to suddenly being empty streets. And I think probably a lot of you remember seeing the images of Venice on TV at that time. So I reached out to people I knew in Venice, people I already knew, and then met a whole lot of new people and started gathering their stories, thinking that this would be kind of a primary source to capture what is it like when we have these natural disasters like the Aqua Grande that flooded the city, or the pandemic, these things that may be part of the world's future. And Venice being such a beloved and well-known place, it just seemed really important to kind of capture this story. So that's what I did. And I ended up with this book. It's really an anthology. So I didn't write all these ones. It's 31 different participants, every kind of person, waiters, researchers, environmentalists, tour operators, hotel managers, whole bunch of different people from all walks of life sharing their stories. And some of their stories they shared as essays, some as poems or letters, So there's a really nice variety. And then a number of people wrote in Italian. And so we have some in English and Italian, most just in English, some only in Italian. And it's just become this wonderful record of what happened. And what really surprised me was that when I first got the idea, talking with friends about it, I thought, well, who will want to read this? It might be kind of depressing and dark. And it's absolutely not. It's really, it's like a love letter to Venice. People share what they love about the city. They share their deep desire to find solutions for the problems of over-tourism and the degradation of the environment. Really using this book as kind of a platform to open these conversations, share their love for Venice, and really get people to share that love and want to save the city. So thanks for giving me the chance to tell you all about the book.
Thank you, Kathleen. And finally, we have Elizabeth Jimenez Montelongo. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
All right, hi, I'm Elizabeth Jimenez Montelongo, and I'm the founder, director, and editor of La Raíz magazine. As you can see in the slide, and also here's our last year's issue. And so about La Raíz magazine. La Raíz magazine is a literary magazine that publishes poetry and visual art by community members, writers, and artists based in San Jose, California, and Santa Clara County, while also welcoming work from our national and international community. La Raíz is a multicultural and multilingual publication. The most commonly included languages are Spanish, English, Spanglish. Many multilingual poems include words in Nahuatl and some words in Wirrárica, Vietnamese, and Purépecha. La Raíz magazine 2021 features work from 29 contributors, of which approximately 90% identify as BIPOC, 70% women or girls, and 75% indigenous, Chicana, Chicano peoples, or whose heritage is rooted in lands that are now Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, and South America. And then the issue that you see on the screen, our latest 2022 issue is, it features 52 creative works by 48 contributors. And the creative works are 65% by women and non-binary people. 28% identify only as indigenous, with 72% of contributors identifying as indigenous and or Chicano, Chicana, or Latinx. And then I wanted to share, so the themes that are included in the poetry and art of La Raíz are, they're all very different, but some recurring themes are identity, culture, and celebrations of self, family, and community. And I'd like to share a poem by our youngest contributor this year. He is, I won't share her age, but so we do open publication to contributors under 18 years old as well. And this poem is called Descendants by Jacqueline Pham. My skin is a yarn blanket's grandmother crafted to keep me warm. Droplets of dewed sweat that trickle off her forehead from late nights cradling me to sleep. My hair is a strings of translucent rice noodles sinking under a rich cloudy broth. Mother put her heart and soul into. Pulled up and brushed by the handles of aged wooden chopsticks, clouds of swirly steam escaping. My hands are the oranges Auntie picks from her garden as a gift, the eve of Lunar New Year, placed on the colorful pile of fruit and offerings we pray to before setting off sparkling firecrackers, the ends of our incense crumbling away into an ashy dust. I am from a descending line of women, women who fear nothing, women who fight for what they believe, women who uplift one another. My existence is a slap to our oppressor's game, is a splotch on the fabricated facade, is inherently radical. And again, that was Descendants by Jacqueline Pham. And I'd also like to share that La Raíz magazine offers free generative poetry workshops, visual arts workshops, and we also host creative showcases where community members, writers, and visual artists can share their work. And our next creative showcase is a part 2 launch on Tuesday, December 13th, 6:30 p.m. Pacific on Zoom. And we'll be featuring contributors. We have open mic and a free raffle of issues of La Raíz magazine 2022. And our website is rootsartistregistry.com/La Raíz. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So thank you, each of you, for sharing your expertise and insight from your respective fields of work. It's very inspirational. I'll be asking some questions now. With time permitting, we can open it up. Thank you very much again to all the authors. So my first question is for all of you, and feel free to jump in. What has inspired your work, and what was the research process or your process leading up to the creation of your work? Whoever wants to go first. You can raise your hand or
I can jump in. The idea actually came from a woman named Rosemary Wilmot, who lives in England, and she had been following my blog. I blog about Venice, and I had done other books about Venice. And she was the one who said, you know, look at our friends in Venice and what they're going through. We really should capture their stories. So she inspired me and then helped me find the people. And then it was really the people that I talked to that inspired me back. In fact, the woman on the cover here, Graziella Giusto, she's become a dear friend and has done a lot of work in Venice to bring people together, to highlight the issues, to promote the book, and just the ideas of sustaining Venice. So they inspire me to work harder all the way here from California to see if I can have any positive impacts in Venice.
That's awesome. Thank you. Robert, I think I saw your hand up. Go ahead.
Well, I was inspired to write my book after teaching probably about 1,000 students introductory level courses on the US and California systems of government. And I realized over the nearly 2 decades I've been teaching that many of my students have really learned things that are wrong about our Constitution. And we can see how terribly consequential that is with the January 6th attack on the Capitol by people who thought that they were attacking the government in order to save it. An act that is unconstitutional as well as illegal. And we've seen some people now who have been convicted of seditious conspiracy. So it was really my students that motivated me to write this book.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to jump in, or I can move on? Okay, sorry, AJ?
Sure. Hi, you know, it's interesting that I think that there's some things that I have in common with Kathleen in her book, and that is, of course, I was inspired to write this book to, above all, tell the stories of what my friends have gone through in Penipe and around the volcano Tungurahua. But I was also inspired, I think, by 3 other things. And that was my first, primary sort of motivation. But if I was going to tell their story, I had to tell it with some purpose. And I got into doing work in disasters and doing work in the Andes. It sounds silly, but, from my generation, I grew up with Mr. Rogers, right? And Mr. Rogers question, look for the helpers, right? And so in a lot of my work, I'm looking for the helpers, and I'm trying to understand sort of how help works. And in the course of the book, I come up with some, I think, surprising conclusions. And I think that's maybe for a response to a later question on the panel, but I have some surprising conclusions about how help works. But I was also surprised by the fact that I thought I was using social science approaches to studying disasters to try and transform how the public thinks. Every day we talk about natural disasters, right? It's a very, very common term. And social scientists who work on disasters get kind of fussy about that. And they say there's no such thing as a natural disaster, right? That these are disasters are produced in society, right? And at the end of the day, a volcano is just doing its job. And it's when the volcano interacts with a society full of inequalities and all this sort of stuff, that's what makes a disaster. And at the outset, when I first started going down to Penipe, that's sort of the story I thought I was telling. But as I spent time with campesinos in the highlands around Tungurahua, I started realizing that that whole argument really depends on one very particular version of what nature is and where nature ends and society begins. And that's not how it works in Penipe and in the highlands. So that was another really big thing that inspired me to tell this story, to actually not just use social science to transform public thinking, but actually use indigenous thinking to transform how we think in the social sciences.
Thank you for those insights. We have, I think we're a little limited on time, but I want to get to the Q&A questions. And for our audience joining us, please feel free to enter any questions you have in our Q&A. First up, for any authors who also have a day job, is it difficult to focus and meet deadlines when you also have to work on someone else's schedule? So anyone who wants to go ahead and answer that. Oh, and actually, I think we're fine on time. We've got 15 minutes. So did any?
I can answer
Sure.
that again. I'm a high school teacher, and it's extremely hard to find time to write. And writing takes mental space. So I find that for the creative process, I need to have free space in my mind to get back into this other place, this other time in the creative process of, making ideas come together and making sentences and so on. And I spent a lot of time grading my students' papers. And so it's really hard to balance that and can be really frustrating. But, when you love something and when the project feels important, you find a way. You can always find time for the things you love. And I think that that's become kind of a mantra for me, that I don't like to say, oh, I don't have time for something. Instead, I think, where can I make the time? And so that's how I manage to put books together, even when life is busy and when my day job gets in the way.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's very important to make time for our priorities. Anyone else? We do have another question, but if no one else wants to add to this first question here, I can go ahead and read the other one. This one is specifically for Professor Foss. It says, Professor Foss has a new book with the university press. Can you say anything about promotional efforts an author has to make on behalf of an academic press? And then, will any authors today attend the MLA National Convention in San Francisco early next month?
Hi. Well, thank you very much for the question. There really aren't. If I'm going to be honest, like I'm not beholden to any particular events. Certainly, when you submit a proposal for a book to an academic publisher, and this is true for even non-academic publishers, you do, as part of the proposal process, you do have to say something about like what you think the market and audience is for the book, and say something about what you will do to promote it. So I've done, book launches and some author signings. I just did some up in Seattle a couple of weeks ago. I was scheduled to do one this week in San Jose, but I broke my shoulder. So I've had to cancel some things. I've got a lot of podcasts coming up that I'm doing. So yeah, I just try to get involved. What I've tried to do is rather than just trying to promote myself, is to participate in things like this where it's multiple authors. So that we can have like essentially a conversation with one another instead of just, this awkward sort of stuff of like, come see me, I'm so great. but to have a conversation with authors around sort of shared themes and to create an event and a party of it. And no, sadly, I will not be at MLA. Thank you.
Thank you for answering the question. I have another question for you all. So in your process, oh, I'm sorry, Robert, did you want to go ahead?
Well, yeah, I would like to address that question because my first two books were academic publications, but this book is a trade book. And so there are some real significant differences between the two, like Professor Voss was also just referencing. When you do an academic book, you have to essentially self-promote. Many of the academic presses have been consolidated, and most of them are owned now or published or have distribution deals with large international publishers. So they put out a lot of books. They don't really put a lot of effort into promoting your book. So if you're going the academic book route, in order for your book to get out, to get it reviewed, to set up talks, you really have to do all that work yourself or hire a publicist. I learned something new putting out a trade book, is that even though it's a small publisher that published my book, they do help a lot with publicity, but you still have to do some of that work yourself too. So either way you go, you do have to put a lot of extra time into it. If you just drop your book, nobody will find out about it. So if you go that route of an academic publisher, I suggest setting aside 3 to 6 months to really do outreach to get your book out there.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Did anyone else have anything to add? Okay, so then I'll go ahead and ask my next question. In your process of your work, I'm sure there's a lot, but is there one particular thing that surprised you or that you found unexpected about your work or your research process that you want to share with us?
Am I recognized?
Please go ahead, Mahendra.
Okay. When I started my research process I interviewed over 150 people. And then once after the interview, I started writing. And it so happened that I wrote more than 500 pages. And then I had a problem cutting it down to a size like my publisher wanted no more than 325 pages. So that was a difficulty that I faced, but I somehow managed to edit the extra pages out.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of excellent information comes in, so it must be a process to sift it down to what you need. Thank you. AJ?
Oh, hi. Well, I suspect in some ways that I certainly struggled in the same way that Mahendra did. I had to cut about 20,000 words from the first draft of this. And sort of, somewhat in common with Robert, I put the finishing touches on this book, right when January 6th happened. And there's a lot of institutional thinking in my book, and I think that institutional thinking really looms large and will continue to do so following January 6th. But we have essentially, and this is true for most folks in the public, we have basically 3 hypotheses, 3 arguments that about cooperation and how it works. One is that people are essentially altruistic, right? And then in the event of a disaster, if everything crumbles, people will come together, right? And that's the positive, sort of very alluring take on human nature. The other one is the more pessimistic one, right? That people are essentially selfish and will try to maximize their own gain for the minimal amount of effort and output, right? And there's a third one. Disaster anthropologists have found in a lot of different contexts that people tend to come together in short waves of altruism during a disaster, and old sort of divisions of race, class, gender, ethnicity tend to disappear as everyone helps everyone. But as soon as aid arrives, people return to sort of competing over these sorts of things, and the cooperation ends. Well, I went to Penipe saying, okay, well, when is the cooperation going to end? And the thing is that what I learned in Penipe and what I learned about the tradition of Minga is that Minga is an institution. It didn't end. It was transformed. It moved around in different types of places. People experimented with it in lots of different ways, but it was an institution. It was an institution that people had invested in for nearly 1,000 years, as far as we can tell. So the cooperation that lasts longest in disaster is the cooperation that starts long before, right? And this type of institutional thinking doesn't require us to, and these institutional approaches to mobilizing, human mutual aid, it doesn't require us to have any sort of metaphysical faith in human nature. It requires us to invest in and build and sustain institutions.
Thank you. Kathleen?
Yeah, thank you. I mentioned it briefly earlier. The biggest surprise for me was how hopeful and joyful and resilient the stories were in this book. And it just led to people coming together and wanting to do more and more and share the stories with a bigger audience. So I ended up kind of coming together with the different authors and contributors to the book. And we were part of, someone from Scotland reached out to us about being part of a panel discussion on Venetian sustainability. And so last April, we were part of a panel. So who knows, when you write a book, who's going to read it and where it's going to go and who it might change and who it might touch, how big it can get, which is super exciting. And then all of the money that we make from the book, none of the contributors get any money. I take no profit from the book. All of the money goes back to grassroots organizations in Venice. And for example, one of those organizations recently had a fundraiser. They raised enough money to get this machine to take plastic waste and turn it into things like park benches. So it's, you have no idea where your writing ends up touching other people's lives. And I find that very exciting.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to go? Okay. I have a question specifically for Elizabeth, if that's okay. So Elizabeth, I wanted to ask a kind of like a two-part question. How do writers get their works published in La Raíz? And then, well, I'll let you answer that first, and then I'll ask.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the question. So we have an open call for entries before publishing every issue. So since we just we're actually, in the process of publishing the 2022 issue. So the form is usually up, like, like rolling. People call it rolling submissions. We say entries. So people can send it at any time, and we'll look at those entries to choose what gets published in the next issue. And we're actually going to have a shorter open call from maybe like a week from now to January, early February, for a special issue that's going to come out in the spring. It's the Gente Chicana issue, which hasn't been announced yet, actually. So there will be like an open call specifically for that as well. And we don't charge at all for submissions. So it's one free entry per person. And then people can send like a donation or a tip if they want to send additional entries.
Thank you. The other part of my question, and you kind of addressed it a little bit, was if you could give some insight into your editorial process.
Sure. Well, I'll just kind of give an overview of what I do as an editor. So after we receive these entries, for example, for the poetry, the art's a little different, but for the poetry, so we'll look at these. We have a review panel, which is like, last year was a little less, but I think we had 5 people this year. And so we look at the work and choose like what fits, what's like cohesive for the spirit of the issue, which is usually, like I mentioned earlier, like tends to be work that addresses like identity, culture, or personal experiences. A lot of it's often like about family or like community. And, you know, sometimes a little bit of like history or politically related poetry. And so we look at the entries to see what will like fit well, and also kind of what aligns with the values of the people that work with La Raíz, like our review panel, and our the people that are involved also include people that attend our free generative poetry workshops and present at our showcases. So there's kind of like a certain set of themes, kind of recurring themes, and so we kind of like try to develop that by selecting work that that addresses those themes. And then as an editor, I also like, you know, I help select the work that gets published and work with the contributors to make like any, like, we don't like to do very like deep drastic editing or make suggestions where it amounts to like completely rewriting sections or anything. Like we respect the work as it is, but if there's like, you know, like small adjustments that we can suggest that we think would make the poem stronger, like I'll communicate with the poets and see like if they approve those, or we just talk about it and figure out like something that would improve like certain lines of their poem or the imagery. And sometimes like small things, even like punctuation, can really affect like the rhythm in which a poem is read. So yeah, so we look at all of that. So it's like an extra added support for the poets that get published. Like they'll have a, you know, like a slightly what do you call it? You know, like an edited draft of their poem that they can then also, you know, include in their own poetry collection when they publish their book.
Okay, thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to go ahead and ask a closing question. If maybe each of you could just give any final words of advice for anyone who wants to get published. So whoever wants to go first, please jump right in.
I'll go first. It's not an easy task. Unless you are a well-known author or a college professor, like my friend Robert and Mr. Fast, it is so difficult for a guy who's hardly known. And so I took the self-publishing route, and there were so many publishers, and it was so difficult to choose the right one. But I've really found one. There are some pretty good and few honest, and they tell you the process right from the beginning. And if you make a mistake, they try to correct it. So I was able to choose a good one, and they came out with a great book. And they during the process, I learned quite a few things. But I can tell anyone who wants to publish, it's not an easy, but you have to keep faith in yourself and keep trying.
Thank you, Mahendra.
Like Mahendra, I am self-published, and it's worked out pretty well for me. I would say to people, just do it. Like at the beginning, when I decided to try and write my first book, I thought, who am I to write a book? You know, why should I do this? I'm not an expert. And then I just did it anyway. And it's been wonderful. You know, I have not sold a New York Times bestseller. I'm not the Oprah book pick or anything like that, but it has led to so many really great relationships with people, to growing as a person, to you know, just having people react to my books in so many positive ways, and it's been wonderful. And now with things you know, like Amazon KDP, and there's a plethora of other small publishers, it's really possible to do it yourself. It's not actually that hard. And then I was lucky enough to get a publisher in Venice. So that's been good. So that my book sells in its natural market plus here. But if anyone is interested in my book, you can reach out to me at KathleenNGonzalez@yahoo.com. And KathleenNGonzalez.com is where all my books are. So I'd be happy to get my book in your hands.
Thank you. And please feel free to, all of you, enter your information into the chat for everyone if you feel so inclined. Does anyone else have any final words of advice? If not, then
Sure.
we can go ahead. Okay, yeah, please.
Well, I would say, first of all, that, you can always edit a bad draft. You can never edit a blank page. So the first step of it is really just committing to the work, right? And thinking first about your vision, or, what are the stories you want to tell and who do you want to tell them to? And you need to really work backwards from that. The next thing is, for my type of work, I actually do have a trade a book in the works right now too, but all of my books so far have been with academic publishers. And so usually at the conferences, like I think there was a question from one of the audience about, MLA, mentioning MLA next week. There's acquisitions editors at these different conferences. So it's always a good idea to speak with an acquisitions editor. You go to their booth. They're typically taking meetings every hour. I don't believe in actually submitting my book proposals until my book is done. A lot of people do get contracts before that. I have enough deadlines in my life. So I want to let the book come through me and then submit it when I'm done with it. But different strokes, different folks. Some people will thrive off those deadlines. But it's important, whether you're submitting a proposal or not, to speak to an acquisitions editor to say, hey, this is the type of project I'm working on. Do you think they would be interested in that here? And speak to a few of them from different publishers. Because they might be interested in that in the abstract, and then when they see your proposal in the end and your final draft, maybe that's not for their shelf. So it's good to know that there's interest in more than one place.
Thank you for that advice. That's very insightful. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I respond real quick too.
Yes.
I was just going to encourage people, specifically poets, but any kind of writers, to to share their writing in literary journals or in community publications as op-eds, publish anywhere so that people can see your work and become familiar with it. And that it's a really great way, for me as a poet, it's been a great way also to connect with other poets and community members. So while you're waiting to maybe put a full book out of whatever genre it is that you write in, you can still share shorter pieces of writing with the public.
Thank you. And I think I saw Robert.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Elizabeth and AJ just said by also suggesting that do your homework. When you find a publisher, research which acquisitions editor to approach. They'll say on their page what subject matter they're the editor for. And also, I had incredible help from a friend who had been widely published. He gave me an example of his book proposal, and it was incredibly informative. And I suggest really spending the time to write your proposal, whether you're going to submit a book that's already done, like AJ does. I also do the same thing, or you want to propose a book. A really solid proposal will really get the attention of an acquisitions editor. So just be sure that you really send in a polished proposal.
Thank you. We have no more Q&A questions. So I'd like to thank each of you for joining us. Thank you for your time and your expertise. I really appreciate all the insight, as I'm sure everyone attending has. So thank you all. We are putting information that our authors and editor have today shared with us in the chat. So feel free, if you miss anything, send us a chat and we will respond. Back to you, Kyle. Thank you again for joining our panel today, authors and editor.
Yeah, just want to say thank you once again to our authors for our first panel. We have AJ Foss, Mahendra K. Doshi, Robert Ovets, Kathleen Gonzalez, and Elizabeth. Sorry, your name is not on there. Menez. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next panel. So Bill Bowman from the San Jose Public Library will be moderating that one, and it's Elizabeth Jimenez Montalongo is our editor of Libraries. Bill, go ahead and take it away when you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. Welcome to the second panel of this discussion on this rainy Saturday afternoon. We categorized the books in this session as interpersonal relations, in that we thought that each of your books involved some sort of personal interaction with others in one form or another. I'd like to introduce our authors, Candy Milo, who wrote Surviving the Odd, Mabel Meenan, Far From Home, Lily Espinoza wrote Nurturing Ourself, Susie Ross, who wrote The Map to Wholeness, and Bruce Reyes-Chow, In Defense of Kindness. I'd like to give each author a few minutes to discuss their works, and then we'll go into the discussion part of the panel. Anyone's free to jump in.
Hi there, I am Candy Milo, and I wrote Surviving the Odd, which is my memoir of growing up in San Jose, California, specifically downtown San Jose, Google Maps specific, across the street from San Jose State University. And my father opened one of the first halfway houses for the mentally impaired, developmentally disabled, and emotionally abused in 1969. He wanted to give something back to society, and it was my childhood, and I didn't get a sash. I'm not upset, not at all. And this is my story of living with the deinstitutionalization of mental patients, the influx of patients from other states. They flooded the San Jose, Santa Clara County area, and what it was like to grow up with sort of an outsized father who struggled himself and who was a stand-up comic, and coming out the other side just fine, and hoping to do something about the current situation of homelessness combined with mental illness today that we're seeing. And I hope that you'll enjoy reading it, and I can't wait to talk about it.
Mabel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mabel Ninan. I was born and raised in the south of India, in a city called Hyderabad. I have an MBA in HR and marketing, and I worked across various industries in different roles, ranging from business development to project management. I worked for a decade and then moved to the US because of my husband's work. So technically, the word used for someone like me is a trailing spouse, which means I'm a spouse of an expat. Initially, I was excited to move to the US because it was just a new phase of life. But then I realized quickly that it was a lot of change. I struggled to cope with changes in culture, changes in weather, food, everything else. And even though I was raised in an urban city and I thought I was quite westernized, but still, I grieved the loss of community, culture, family, and other things that I had left behind. And this affected how I saw myself. And it began a search for identity. But this also affected my faith, because I was raised in a Christian home, and my faith, impacts everything in my life. And so my search for answers led me to my faith, and led me to, go back to the Bible and see if there are answers for my struggle. And I discovered that, what the Bible says, that I am a sojourner on earth, that I am an immigrant, a stranger in a strange land, to quote the Bible. And that was a part of my identity that I had previously overlooked or completely ignored. But now I had that perspective as a stranger in a strange land, quite literally. And so that's what my book talks about. I draw parallels between my literal immigrant experience and my spiritual identity as an immigrant, and how gaining that perspective actually gave me purpose and hope and joy. And I just hope that the readers would also find lessons to take away from that book in the same way that I did. Thank you.
Lily?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this community event. My name is Dr. Lily E. Espinosa, and the book I wrote is Nurturing Ourself. This is my second self-published book. So this one came out this summer, and before that I had written a book called Not Getting Stuck, which is about Latina transfer students. And I've always been amazed by the power of education to uplift communities and uplift our sense of self. And I've always been an educator who believes that education is open to anybody, it could change the world, and that it really is a way to transform. And I've worked in education for over 20 years, and I found myself unemployed in the year 2012. And I thought, okay, I'll just apply for another job. And I was applying for job after job after job. And after 200 interviews and after being rejected time and time again, I decided maybe I don't need to work in education. Maybe I need to find another field. And for me, it felt like losing my sense of self and losing my sense of spirit, because for me, I had been so committed to what I was doing in education that I couldn't imagine doing anything else. So I applied to go into another master's degree, and I studied health education, which allowed me to study wholeness and sense of self and this idea of who are people and who are we. And it made me realize that we never really learn about the sense of being human or our sense of human consciousness while we're in school. And it made me really think, like, why doesn't higher education focus a little bit more on how we nurture our sense of self? And so in my book, it's broken down into 3 parts. One part is about the role of education and how we could transform higher education institutions into these centers where we learn about how to nurture ourselves. The second part of the book is just some essays that I had written while I was in that master's program on health, and I talk about the power of taking care of ourselves. And then the third part of the book is really just blog posts that I've done over the years. And I always tell people that if you're thinking about writing a book, anything that you've ever written is fair game. And so I literally went back into some of my personal essays from my undergraduate work, from my graduate work, and from blog posts, and put it together to form this part 3 book. So I tell people, if you want to read the book and just want to hear my own experience of how I overcame this big challenge in my life, start with part 3 and then work your way back. But hopefully with this book, it provides a framework for people who have lost their job or lost their sense of self or lost their hope in what they would like to do or their sense of identity, and provides them solutions that are based on educational research, personal experience, lived experience of myself and how I overcame this huge challenge, and how now I'm doing something very fulfilling. But it's taken me probably over 10 years to get my footing back. And I call this my survivor guide for the post-pandemic. So it's really exciting, and I hope you take a look at it.
Susie Ross?
Hi there. So thanks for having me. So my book is called The Map to Wholeness, and I'm an associate professor at San Jose State, been teaching here for 22 years. And this book is about my research about transformation, specifically what happens to us before, during, and after a life-changing experience. So what came out of my doctoral research is that transformation is in the shape of a figure 8. It's a model, it's a figure 8 model of transformation. And so the upper half of the 8 is something we all are familiar with. It's the hero's journey. So if you've seen the Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, or any sort of movie where there's a hero involved, that's the upper half typically of the figure eight. But what was novel and what came out of the research was that there's a hidden half of transformation, which is the lower half of the figure eight. And the lower half is the integration of transformation. And so it's very private, it's very internal, and that lower half of the figure eight is also pretty difficult. And so I wrote this book so that people who are, because everyone's going through transformation, you know, and it's just because transformation is happening throughout the universe all the time. We're part of it. So and transformation, much of it is really difficult. And so I wrote this book in order to help people to navigate whatever it is that you're going through right now is on that figure eight. And specifically, there are 4 phases in the upper half, and there are 9 phases in the lower half. And the 9 phases in the lower half is really when the alchemy of transformation happens and you birth the new self. And by the time transformation is over, you've made it back to the center of the figure eight. And I'll say one last thing about the book. What I do in the book is I lead you through the process of the 13 phases of transformation by telling the stories of 2 people from the very beginning all the way to the end of their transformation. Across 15 years, actually, their transformations were. And so they're real life stories to kind of illuminate what happens so that you can hopefully find yourself in your own story and know that you're not alone.
Thank you, Susie. And next is Bruce Reyes-Chow.
Greetings all. Wait till my video comes up. All right, good to be with you. My name is Bruce Reyes-Chow. I'm fairly new to San Jose. My wife grew up here. I grew up in Sacramento and Stockton, served in San Francisco for about 30 years, was in Palo Alto for 3 years, and I've been in San Jose now for about a year. I am by training a Presbyterian minister. I've been a pastor for about 25 years, but I've for the last 15 years, I've been part-time. And the other half time is I write and speak. I've published 5 books and have a 6th one in manuscript is due in February. 4 of them have been with publishers, and 2 in the middle, I did a little backwards, have self-published passion projects. And so I would have never thought when I was younger that I could legitimately call myself an author and a writer. So I get to travel a lot and speak about writing, spirituality, technology, parenting, all of the kinds of things that I write about. The book I'm talking about today is the last book. It was launched during pandemic, March 16th of 2020. Always a lovely time to launch a book. But it opened up some really interesting ways of interacting with people. I was actually in more places during a book launch during the pandemic than I would have been able to be in the planned personal book tour. And so created a lot of adaptability. My book is not a religious book. I am a religious person, and that is where my training is, but it is a book that is really much more secular. It is meant to be for colleges, city reads, high school reads, much more broader kind of audience. I take a couple of stances around kindness. One is that I think when, if you have a child near you or you're a child adjacent and somebody asks you, do you want that child to be kind? Nobody says no. Like, we don't say, no, we don't want the child to be kind, but somewhere as we get older, we decide that kindness is no longer a valuable virtue or a lens through which we move through the world. And I actually feel like some of the most important people and leaders in our country and our world have been really kind. The problem is that we also equate kindness with being nice or being weak or being conflict avoidant. And I've tried to flip that idea about kindness as actually being a lens, a tool, or virtue that actually moves movements of social justice. In the book itself, it is the best review I got was from a friend of mine who's an activist and said to me, tweeted out, I don't want to read your book because it might change the way I behave. And so part of this is really an everyday choice for a larger scale way to approach the world. And so that's what this book is about.
Okay. And last, Sherry Halpern with Mistress Molly and her senior sex club.
Hi, thank you for having me. My background has been in television and film as a producer and a writer. And when I was perceived as a dinosaur about 15 years ago, I decided I was going to become a novelist. So I was listening to all of the predecessors in this particular group who are writing about transformation and self-improvement. And even though my book is a book of fiction, it deals with all of those subjects. The story is about Molly Shapiro and her three best friends, all septuagenarians, all frustrated with their lives. Molly is playing bunco and mahjong and dominoes every single day of the week, and thought to herself, I've been a faithful wife. I've been a wonderful mother. When is it going to be my turn? When can I prove myself as a person? So she coaxes her three best friends to go on a journey, and they move to another state. They have a business that some might say are saucy, and it has lots of interrelationships that can be seen by any group of people. The book is about relationships, but it's also about your third act of life. It's about senior sex. There, I said it. It's about friendship. It's about adult, child, parent relationships, but all in a very humorous way. Molly is my third book in the past 15 years. My first, Rescue Me, He's Wearing a Moose Hat, and 40 Other Dates After 50 was optioned by the incredible man who gave us Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile, and became a bestseller. My next book, Just Call Me Lady, was released about 2.5 years ago. And it's just a sweet, romantic, lovely comedy. And I'm actually working on a sequel to it. And then Mistress Molly is laughs. It's something that you can see yourself in, whether you're 30 or 40 or 70 or 80, and say, yeah, I can relate to that. So my goal is to make people laugh and to enjoy life. And that's about it. By the way, all three of my books have been optioned for film. So that's very exciting. If you want to know anything more about me or the books, you can go to my website, which is sherryhalpern.com. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for being here, Sherry. Okay, we will, I have a few questions. Anyone who wants to put any questions in the Q&A, please go ahead and do so. But I'll start off with the first question here. Some of you have already sort of touched on this, but what led you to write this book? Was there a particular time when you realized I have a great topic, I should put it down on paper? Was there a particular moment or event that comes to mind when you said, okay, this is a project, I'm going to jump into it? Okay, Candy.
I started to write this because I had been doing it. I'm an actor in Los Angeles. I've been doing cartoon voices for about 36 years. And the question that I get when I see a lot of fans or whatever is, where do the voices come from? And if I ever talk about my childhood, people assume that the voices come from the residents of our halfway house. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And so what led me to do this was to show you where my voice came from and who I am and why I'm able to create characters and voices apparently easily, because I was shown things that a lot of other people didn't get to see. And I wanted to do my project, my voice, my story from my perspective of a young girl in the 1969, 1970 years, where we didn't see people like this on the streets. This was things, these were people that were in movies. They were never to be seen. And we're seeing these people again on the streets today. And so it prompted me to want to do something about it. And that's why I wrote it.
Okay, Bruce, you had your hand up next.
Great, thanks. So I'm like that teenager that has a great band name before you know how to play the instruments. So I have tons of book titles that I think are really great. And then I start a few of them. And if you look at my living writer kind of folder, I have tons of books I've started. In Defense of Kindness was a thought that I had when I began to see kind of these really acts being elevated online that really are just kind of the way we should be with each other. And so was trying to think of how do we reframe kindness. That was one of what motivated me to do that. And then the elections happened when President Trump was elected, and I could stop feeling very kind and felt like I couldn't write the book. I had signed a contract and had started writing, asked if I could pause, make sure I didn't have to pay back the advance, all those kind of things. And then I went and sat in the movie theater of the Mr. Rogers documentary. And for those of you that don't know, Mr. Rogers is a Presbyterian minister, ordained Presbyterian minister. He's the only person that my denomination has ever ordained to television as a minister of Word Sacrament. So he's kind of an icon in my tradition. We went and saw his documentary. And in the middle of that documentary, I said, God, so I turned to my wife and I said, I have to finish this book now. I think that's what's Mr. Rogers is telling me. And then the next morning, my publisher sent me an email and said, hey, are you ready to pick up this book? Now, I don't believe in like huge signs, billboards and, neon signs and stuff, but that was one of them. And so pushed the book out in about 2 more months and then kind of went on. So it was seeing that kindness was being diluted and no longer being a powerful lens. And then Mr. Rogers, in my first draft of my book, it started out with Mr. Rogers is a pain in the ass. And then my editor said, I don't think we can actually say that about Mr. Rogers, but it's true. He made me write that book.
Thank you, Bruce. Susie and then Sherry.
So what happened for me is I studied about 15 different disciplines to understand transformation, and as a part of my doctoral work and beyond. And so when we were doing the data analysis, we still had no idea for sure what the outcomes of the research would be. And I'll never forget, we were all sitting on the floor of this one woman's apartment with paper, big paper everywhere. And when we were doing the analysis, and at some point, the figure 8 emerged, like came together on the paper. And when I saw it for the first time, and I knew the literature, no one else did. And when I saw it, I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to write a book. This was not part of the plan. I'd already been, doing my PhD for 6 years. And the last thing I wanted to do was go write a book. And, but when I saw it, I knew that was what I would have to do, because I knew that the literature did not have anything in it that resembled this. And I felt that I needed to write the book because, like I said earlier, transformation is so difficult, and some parts can be very lonely and scary. And I thought, you know what, I have to do this so that, people can have a guide about how to make it through. And it's not like we don't make it through, but it sure can be a lot easier if you know what's going on. And so that was my big surprise.
Sherry, and then I guess Candy had another thing to say. So Sherry first.
I don't, sorry, I'm taking it off.
Okay, so Sherry's next.
I wrote Mistress Molly as an homage to all of my senior friends. People think that when you hit a certain age, you're useless. And I wanted to show in a very humorous way that that's just not true. So I based all 4 of my characters on women who are in their 70s and accomplish really fun, wonderful things. So yes, writers write what they're living and what they know.
Thank you, Sherry. Lily?
Yeah, thank you. So the reason I wrote my book was because it was my pandemic project, and I thought the pandemic would end and people would just sort of like go back and do their life just as regular. And then they started talking about the Great Resignation and how so many people are like taking a look at their life and really reevaluating what's important and what should they spend their time on. And a lot of times the world of work and what we do to get paid isn't enough. And there's people quitting left and right, and people are leaving their jobs, and people are changing career fields. And I wanted to write this book now because I was thinking, you know, when you want to change career fields, it's hard to imagine where do I get started in terms of how do I change my thinking and what's important to me. And a lot of times when people do an assessment of their skills, they forget to assess their values and what's important to them in terms of satisfaction. And so my book, I think, helps people who are going to leave their career fields and then reevaluate themselves, and then how to basically find a career path that could be more satisfying. And I thought that was really timely. And then also I got my child tax credit check, and it was enough for me to publish the book. And I'm like, that's it, I'm doing this now. I basically got the check in January and my book was published in March because I self-published it.
Thank you, Lily. Mabel?
Yeah, so at first, my intention behind writing this book was to write a series of letters to my son so that, you know, he knows the history or the background, you know, where we came from and how migration affected everything, and to kind of pass on wisdom to him. So that was the main reason, but then it morphed into something else. And I think another reason, while I was in the middle of the manuscript, you know, we were going through the pandemic and so many other things, that it became more and more clear to me that there was a need for, you know, this message, because everyone's struggling to deal with the change. Everyone's struggling with uncertainty, with grief. And so I just hoped to, in some way, help those who are struggling like me with my message. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Question is directed to Ms. Ross. It says, Ms. Ross has a mid-sized but widely known Bay Area press, North Atlantic. Can she say whether she gets much promotional support from them or whether she does most promotion herself?
Thank you for the question. So yes, I was very fortunate to be picked up by North Atlantic Press, a local mid-sized publisher. And they were pretty helpful for the first several months. They set me up with a book launch, a really nice book launch. They set me up with some really great podcasts and some other opportunities. And, you know, it definitely did help me, but it wasn't very long. It was probably only a few months, maybe 3 months, I think. And then I was just totally on my own. And having a full-time professor job and other things, has been difficult to get myself out there. So I'm very, very grateful for things like this that come along. But I would say that has been a challenge, and that's what I've read about from most authors. It's hard to get yourself out there. I don't know if I'm answering my question, but podcasts are my favorite.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, move on to, okay, we have another Q&A question here. Mabel Needham, does your publisher do much book promotion? And how much promotion do you have to do?
That's a great question. I have to do a lot of the promotion myself. My publisher is a small to medium publisher, and I mean, the Christian publishing industry is a whole new industry by itself, but we share so many things in common with everyone else. And that is that these days, more and more of the responsibility to promote and market falls on the author, especially with nonfiction, bearing the costs of, having blog tours or kind of creating my own network of contacts with the media so that I can do podcast or radio interviews, approaching, libraries or bookstores, all those kind of things. I mean, this is my first book, so that's how my first experience has been, that if you're not someone famous or you don't have a great following, you have to really work hard at, promoting your message.
Thank you for answering that, Mabel. I'll move. Okay, we don't have anything more in the Q&A, so I'll go on to my next question. Did you learn anything that really surprised you or that you found unexpected when writing this book? Is there something that really an aha moment that going, oh my God, where that was a really real epiphany for you when you were either writing or researching this book? I'll start with Susie.
So the way I'll answer this is that I was not really anticipating how much financial sacrifice it would be, and also just personal sacrifice. Just many times when I could have been hanging out with friends or doing fun things, and I'm sitting there writing instead. And then the other piece was just financial, because I hired a professional editor to help me throughout, and that cost me a lot of money to continuously edit, and then also just purchasing websites, fixing the websites, all sorts of other costs involved that I didn't really know about, but I was willing to do because this is like kind of my life purpose. So none of it was really felt like an option. It felt like if I don't do all of this, I'm going to miss my life purpose. So it was worth it to do all that sacrificing.
Thank you. Sherry's up next. And then Candy.
I wrote Mistress Molly and her Senior Sex Club during the pandemic, and I found it at times extremely hard to be funny. I had to dig deep and look into my life and say, okay, this is really what happens. This is what could happen in this situation, because we all were suffering. We all were lonely. We all were scared. So I put a lot of those emotions into the characters while still having to come up with humorous situations. So that was my challenge in writing it.
Thank you, Candy, and then Lily's on deck.
One of the interesting things, and I don't know if other writers have experienced this, but many times the people reading you to move your book forward. I am published with New Haven, very small publisher out of London, Indie, that people have strong opinions about your voice. I write very much in the style of Carrie Fisher. My dad was in show business. I'm in show business. We did this thing. It is, and I kept getting notes that my narrative didn't match the story. And I thought, well, I'm presenting to you who I am. And I was very surprised how much I mean, there were a lot of times that my literary manager would say, well, you have to have a trigger warning. And I thought, while I understand that and I respect that, I wish somebody had given me a trigger warning growing up. But I think that was the most shocking thing to me, was that somebody would say, this very real thing that happened to you, you have to tone it down, change it, or delete it.
Okay. Thank you, Candy. Lily is next with Mabel on deck.
Yeah, for me, I was surprised how hard it was to take things out of it, because like the other authors have said in the previous session, you sometimes want to pour so much into your book, and then I was getting over the page limit as well. And once it was actually published, it was like a lot thicker than my other book was. So this one has 258 pages. And I wanted to put so much in there, but then I'm like, maybe I have enough for a book after this one. You know, you don't have to put everything into one book. So it's really surprising, because I think the idea and the process of writing is like, especially if you're, you know, doing it for the first time, you start thinking, do I really have enough? And you're not sure if you are ready to have that book, because maybe you don't think you have enough material or content. And once you start going, you might realize that you actually have to start letting things go. But at the end of the day, you only want the best of the best to be in the book. And one thing that I included was a story from my father. My father wrote literature articles, and I found something from like 1961 that he had written when he was 25 years old, and I included that in the book. And to me, it felt like it was a legacy project, and it's something that's a record for, you know, all time. And I was able to at least elevate my dad's voice as well, which was really meaningful because he's passed away recently. So it's an opportunity to pick and choose, and it really helps you discover what's important to you.
Thank you, Lily. Mabel?
So one of my drafts that my writing coach looked at, she said, I need more of you in this manuscript, because, you know, I'm a Bible teacher. So I just went teaching. And she said, I had a few stories in there, but not too much. So she said, I need to see more of you, you know, talk about your life, your stories. And I remember telling my husband, but I don't have so many stories. I mean, I don't know what to talk about. I mean, where are all these stories? But so I had to really spend time. It's almost like mining my memories, going back, you know, finding those stories from my childhood, or finding stories, or going back to the first few memories, how I felt when I first landed in the US, or how those first few years were, which I had almost forgotten. So I was surprised that there was so much in there. And another surprising thing is that I think, you know, who would be interested in these stories, or who would want to know? But later on, when some of my my reviews came in, people were interested in those small stories that I thought were the most insignificant. And the other thing that surprised me about writing, you know, your from memory, or writing from your life, is that it is mentally draining. Or maybe it was the first time I was doing it. I felt like that it takes a lot out of me, even though for the most part, they're happy memories, but still it just takes a lot out of a person to write that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one last question. So do you have any advice for people who've written something and want to get published? What has your experience been? Share maybe any war stories, or things that came up that you'd want somebody else to know as they're going through that process. We'll start off with Sherry.
My first book, Rescue Me, He's Wearing a Moose Hat. The book was about 60% finished, and my son met a woman at a party, and the woman, and you know how you say, what do you do? I do this. I'm a teacher, I'm a lawyer, whatever. And she said, oh, I'm an editor at a publishing company. And my son said, oh, my mother's writing a book. I called the woman a couple of weeks later, sent her what I had. 2 weeks later, I got the green light for the book and had a contract 2 weeks after that, a large advance, and the book sold over 10,000 copies. Fabulous. Second book, about, I guess 5-6 years ago, I went back to the same publisher, and they had changed the type of material that they were publishing. Sorry, we can't publish your book. So I went on the mission of trying to find a publisher. After about 50 rejections, I said, okay, I'm going to publish it myself. And I learned how to do it. You have to stick to it. You have to look at all the possibilities of how to publish a book. It doesn't have to be super expensive. There are ways to do it, and sites that you can have editors and covers and all kinds of things done very inexpensively. And I published it myself. And I've had a great time with both that book and my new book, and was able to get it to the right people, because I write visually. I write as if it's going to be a television movie or a feature film. I write the characters as if I see them in my mind acting. So I've been able to get both of them options. So there's no shame in doing self-publishing, and you never know what it's going to be like and where it's going to lead. So do it and ask a million questions of people that have published their own books or have gotten publishers.
Okay, next is Susie with Lily on deck.
So what happened for me is that I went to my friend's graduation. She was graduating with her PhD, and I was just sitting at the table. We're having some dinner together, celebrating, and I met this gentleman. And at the end of the day, I learned that he was a publisher during our dinner. And then I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. And I didn't say anything about my book. And then I was just waiting for the right moment. And then as we were all leaving, I told him, you know, I wrote a book, you know, you might be interested. And then I gave, and he's like, okay. And then I gave him two sentences. And he's like, tell me more. 2 more sentences. Tell me more. 2 more sentences. And he says, how about if we talk next week? And I was like, that's right. And so I had a book deal within like a couple of weeks. So the end of the story is, have your sentences ready, because you never know who you're going to be sitting next to.
So true.
Thank you. Lily.
Yeah, I would say going to college is the perfect experience for people who want to eventually someday write a book, because everything you've written is your work. And so I pulled from when I went to a community college, as well as when I went to UC Berkeley, as well as when I was at Columbia University. I used some of my writing from when I applied to the Ivy Leagues. And then when I got my doctoral dissertation, I used some of that work for my first book. And then when I got my second master's, I used a lot of that work in this book. So I always tell students, if you're thinking about becoming a writer, hold on to your stuff and maybe put it in a, you know, trusty, protected location, because you don't know, years later, it might come to you like, this might actually turn into something useful. And even though when you're a student, you're hating life because these papers are grueling and scary, you can hold on to that for years down the line. And then it becomes something that you pass on to your family. So I always tell people, hold on to the writing that you have, and you can put it together and turn it into something amazing. And it's just based on your life. So it doesn't have to be daunting and scary. You can start with what you know, which is yourself, and then go from yourself out into the community and look at what is a story that hasn't been told, and what can I do to add to that, to the voice that's out there.
Anyone else want to speak on that topic about publishing? Okay, Sherry, you wanted to add something else? You're still muted, Sherry.
Sorry about that. So true. When I was writing Rescue Me, I was taking novel writing classes at UCLA, and I was serial dating. I was 50 years old, had moved to Los Angeles. My husband had passed away a year earlier, and I'd go on these dates, and I would come home, call a girlfriend. We would laugh hysterically about the dates, and I'd go to my computer and write about the date, and I'd give them a name like Mr. Comb Over or Liar, Liar, Pants on Fire. And I was writing a murder mystery at UCLA. And then I decided I want to make people laugh. And I found this file on my computer. So just write everything down, keep files, keep journals, because you never know where it's going to lead to. And those files led to my first book.
Okay. Candy?
I'm coming. Hang on. All right. What I wanted to say.
I'm hanging.
Okay, what I wanted to say was, which is, and I'm trying to think of the author. That's why I turned off my camera. I was looking at my phone. You own everything that happened to you. And this author had said, if people wanted to be thought of nicer in your book, they should have been nicer to you. That was the hardest thing. And everything I want people to take to heart is that you own everything and tell your story. I wrote in the chat for everybody that I researched my book at the Martin Luther King Library some 15 years ago when I did my first draft, and then I got my feelings hurt and I put it away. So all these tools that you have at your disposal only add to the richness of your story. So own your research, own your story, you own everything that happened to you.
So true.
Okay, thank you, Candy, and Bruce.
No, great. So I would say, be confident in writing your story. I mean, this is kind of the thing, right? You can only write your own story, but be confident and bold and be willing to tell it. I've had 3 published with publishers that were advanced based, and I didn't have to have them finished before. And then 2, nobody wanted, so I wrote them on my own because I really wanted to write them. So we wrote them. So I think that's one, but then also be humble enough to know that you are not your best writer without other people seeing those words and reflecting back if you're telling the story you want to tell. And so that first copy edit, that first kind of structural edit, get people who are going to tell you the truth without losing your voice about how you can tell your story better. And then the last thing I would just say, and this is probably for everybody, is you got to write. I mean, I have friends and colleagues all the time, like, I have a book I want to write. I'm like, well, unless you've written it, you actually don't. So you got to write. So whether that's a discipline that you discover, I do all of my writing in chunks. So I leave for days on end and write. Some of my friends get up at 5 in the morning and they write for an hour and a half every day. I can never do that. So I think finding your pattern and your discipline that will actually get your words on paper so that you can begin telling your story in the best way that others are going to hear it in the way that you want. So there you go.
Okay. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, all of our panelists, Candy, Mabel, Lily, Susie, Bruce, Sherry. Thank you very much for being part of our panel today. Really appreciate your feedback and your thoughts. I'm going to turn it back over to Kyle.
Yeah, thank you again to our panelists. Thanks for the discussions that we've had and for sharing everything that you have. We have a lot of people that are definitely interested in the publishing process, so these insights are invaluable to many of them. We are going to take a quick break. So we have about 7 minutes. So we will be back with our final panel at 3:55. So everyone, please join us back here in just about 7 minutes. Okay, thank you. All right, it's 3:55. We are back with our last discussion panel, our last group of authors for the day. It will be Peggy Cabrera, who's a librarian with San Jose State University Library. She's going to be our moderator for the final panel. Peggy, go ahead.
Yes, welcome everybody, and thank you for everybody for coming back. We understand it's a long day, but I don't know about you all, but I am so inspired as a reader, as a writer, from hearing everybody's experiences, their ideas, where, you know, they got their inspiration. So I hope that, you know, you're as inspired as I know we are. So today we have an excellent panel, folks who are writing on science fiction, mystery, historical fiction. And so I'd like to welcome our writers. The first person will be Mary Ray and Wanda Venters. And they're going to be talking about their book, Breakbone Fever.
Mary, you're muted right now.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm a physician trying my hand at writing murder mysteries. This is our first book. Breakbone Fever was written in collaboration with my co-author, Wanda Venters. She's also a physician. She lives in Denver. The idea for Breakbone Fever came to me back when I was living in Houston. In Houston, I like to go to Galveston Island and walk on the beach. And pretty soon I discovered that Galveston had a fascinating 500-year history. It's also the site of the Galveston National Lab, which is a level 4 biosecurity research facility. Sorry, got a cat here. And it's the kind of place where they study all of the worst kind of pathogens and germs, even up to and including Ebola. So at one point, Wanda was visiting me in Galveston, and I just kind of mentioned casually, I thought this would be a great place to set a murder mystery. It's an original setting. It's interesting. Wanda didn't skip a beat. She said, sure, let's do it. And we did. So our book takes place in Galveston, where a researcher who's working at the Gulf National Laboratory is murdered. She was working on dengue, also known as breakbone fever, which is a tropical mosquito-borne illness. And it's called breakbone fever because of the excruciating pain that the patient experiences when ill with it. So our researcher was actually studying the effect of climate change on the migration of tropical diseases and mosquitoes to the southern United States. And our fictional cabal in the EPA wanted the research shut down, and they wanted our researcher shut up. So our protagonists, unsurprisingly, are two female physicians. They're friends of the victim, and they set out to solve this murder. So Wanda and I try to use our expertise as physicians to inject authenticity into our work. My background is emergency medicine, and Wanda's is pediatrics. But we don't want it to get too technical. We don't want to use too much medical jargon and technical information to bog down the plot, because what we really want to do is we want the story and the character development to keep the pages turning. So, and we're happy that this book was a finalist for the Colorado Book Award. We started writing when we were still working, but now we're both retired and we have the gift of time, so we're going to keep at it. Thanks.
Thank you. Our very next author is Linda Ulisate, and she's going to be talking about her next book called Unlocked.
Hi, I'm Linda Ulisate. Thanks for this opportunity to talk about my writing. This is actually my 4th local lit. I participated twice in real life and twice virtually. I'm a lifelong San Jose resident and a retired school teacher, so I totally understand about that gift of time for writing. I'm also a friend of the library, San Jose Public Library, for the Village Square branch. I'm a historical novelist. I have 3 published young adult historical fantasies and 2 published historical novels that are women's fiction. Those are both available through San Jose Public Library, and I have another one coming out in June. My books are novels. Those 3 are novels that are accounts of my ancestors, female ancestors, based on stories told to me by my grandmother. But why I'm here today is with Unlocked. I'm a member of Paper Lantern Writers, which is a marketing collective for historical fiction writers. We all have to do marketing like we've talked about. And so we've gathered together to market each other's books and kind of be strengthen numbers in the marketing. So last year, 8 of us got together and put together this anthology of short stories. And I'll just read the back of the book to you because it says much better than I could. In much the same manner as Pandora, each Paper Lantern writer takes a turn opening an old wooden chest, digging out stories spanning 7 centuries. The individuals in these tales, heroes, villains, and in between, are more than people from the past, whether they are making mayhem, waging war, or quietly holding their families together. Their strength and fortitude shines on the page. From the swinging 70s to the Middle Ages, these characters gather, keep, and spill the secrets of their souls. My story in this book is called True Legacy, and it centers around a character who was an actress in Gilded Age, New York, and lived the last years of her life in Portland, Oregon. When she died, she left that old wooden chest to her niece. Who knows what treasures will be found when this ancient chest is finally unlocked. To learn more about the Paper Lantern writers and our books, we all have novels out, you can visit our Facebook group, Shine with Paper Lantern Writers, and I'll have them put that link in the chat for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. And it is true, the book is a treasure of wonderful stories. Our next writer, Dan Riles, has a book called M. Thank you. The M is for a Dog Show. Please talk to us about your book, Dan.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to all the other authors and hear what they have to share, as well as all the participants that we have on here. I'll give you a little bit quick background about myself. I know I want to keep pressed for time here and stay on track here. Real quickly about myself and my book. I have a background in IT for the last 30 years, information technology and jobs. And I have a love for math and guitar and writing songs, a love for reading and writing, especially in the fields of biography and also in mystery writing. And I'm also kind of, I have, for those who know me, I'm kind of a humorous person, a joking kind of thing. For my last recent birthday, my daughter actually bought me a book on dad jokes, which was kind of a tongue-in-cheek way to respond to this book that I had written. The title itself, M is for Dog Show, is kind of, for those who are familiar with movies and writing and background, it's kind of a play on Alfred Hitchcock and Sue Grafton, who wrote a lot of mystery novels that started with a letter, and then A is for alibi, B is for burglary, those kind of things. And I had a lot of fun writing the book, and it really came out of after a year and a half of the COVID, and even before COVID, I started writing a locked room mystery, which was very tragic. It was a murder mystery where several people get killed in the book. And this book I wrote after it, which is the first one I had published, because it was kind of therapeutic for me to write. It was kind of fun and kind of a relief. I've always compared it to a meeting, Naked Gun meets Best in Show is kind of what it is. Where you have kind of a serious dragnet individual cop who is forced to buddy up with a not so serious cop that is with him, and then they go out to try to solve this murder mystery, or this murder that takes place at a pet show in New York City. And so there's a lot of similarities to reality and what's going on here. But again, it's a lot of tongue-in-cheek that's involved with it. After I finished writing this novel, and I'll come back to talking about the novel itself, I actually wrote a short story, which is called Girl on a Grill, which is also kind of a spoof on titles that are used in that genre. And it was also a release of humor too as well. And I think Sherry Halperin mentioned earlier about humor, and humor is hard to write, especially when you're writing a murder mystery and trying to meld those two together. But for me, it was a lot of fun. And I don't want to go too much into the details about what happens, but the two cops work together. They try to solve a murder mystery that takes it at the pet show. They have a weekend to finish the murder. If for those of you who are familiar with pet shows or dog shows in general, you really, all the attendants come, they fly into New York City or wherever the location is, and then they all leave. So they have the pressure of time upon them within 2 days by Sunday night to complete the murder itself. They go through their suspect list, more mayhem or hilarity ensues while they're doing the process. And then everything wraps up with a conclusion with assistance with the dogs and with the owners themselves. And think kind of like it's 48 Hours, or if you will, or Lethal Weapon, where these two are together, two totally different personalities, and they learn from each other at the end of the story. The serious one becomes a little bit more easygoing, and the more easygoing becomes more serious. And it was just a huge amount of fun to write the book. And I really do hope people, if you go into it, if for those of you who are interested in reading this kind of stuff, or might take warning that there are a lot of puns, there's a lot of humor in it, but there's a lot of references to dogs and details about interaction with dogs and dog owners themselves. So I think you'll have a lot of fun for those people who enjoy pets and dogs in particular of all different types of breeds. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I agree. M is for Dog Show is a great book. If you like everything about mysteries and dogs, you will appreciate that book. Our next book is The Glitch, written by Grace Kwok. Grace, would you like to talk to us about your story?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Peggy. So hi, everyone. I'm Grace. I am a student at UCLA in my third year pursuing my bachelor's in electrical engineering. I grew up in San Jose. I've lived in San Jose my whole life. Mostly went to the Cambrian branch and the Willow Glen branch. So it's a really special opportunity for me to be at LocalLit this year. Throughout 2021, last year, I wrote my debut novel, The Glitch, and I actually published it in paperback and ebook on Amazon on December 13th, 2021. So I'm also celebrating my 1-year publication anniversary. But about the book, it's a sci-fi novel. It follows an engineer who lives in this techno-utopian society. I usually describe it to people as like the Bay Area on steroids. Everything's very data-driven, automated. The system assigns people their optimal careers, hobbies, even their pets. But then one day there's a glitch in the system, and without giving away any spoilers, that sparks a huge transformation in the way that our main character sees herself and the world around her. And I also wanted to share why I wrote the book. So having grown up in Silicon Valley, being a Gen Zer, I felt like I was surrounded by a lot of subtle messaging about what the quote unquote right way to live is. Ideas about efficiency, productivity, like the dream of working at Apple or Google and making a lot of money kind of thing. But after I read a couple more like philosophical books by people like Jenny Odell and Gia Tolentino, I realized that there's another way to see the world, one that isn't so like there's one way to do everything, sort of like techie and capitalistic, and instead a way to see the world more nuanced and complicated, messy, and just like kind of beautifully chaotic. So I wanted to write this book to explore these ideas through fiction and conduct almost a thought experiment for myself and others. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the panel.
Thank you. Thank you, Grace. The Glitch is a great book for those of you who are interested in exploring like what's life and why do I have to do certain things. So please read it if you would like to take a look at that. Our very next author is Bruce Overby, and he's going to talk about his book, The Cyclone Release. Bruce.
Thank you. Thank you, Peggy. Yeah, so I am a native of San Jose.
Uh-oh. We may have lost.
May have some technical challenges here. Bruce, are you still there?
I think he disappeared. I know people's wireless are kind of wonky right now with the weather. Okay, we'll wait for him to come back on, and then we'll go ahead and ask him some to talk to us about his book. So let's hope he joins us soon. Why don't we go ahead? Why don't we go ahead and get started with our panel questions? And let's hope he can come back. So the question I have for all of you, I had a chance to read all your books, and they were just so diverse, so many ways that people approach your book. I just got to know, like, what inspired you to write your work?
I'll start real quickly. I said I was in IT for 30 years, and that's my full-time position. But on the side, I actually spent 17 years running a pet sitting business. Had a lot of fun with that. Real life stories. A dog owner myself for, gosh, 17, 18 years, 19 years now. A lot of fun with that. Getting to know people, their personalities, how they deal with dogs. Some of the people we had were involved with pet shows themselves. So I'd say, and just getting to know the personalities of dogs and how they interact with people. So that is kind of melded in my book too as well. You'll see a lot of those kind of spoofing people, owners, as well as the dogs themselves in that.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, who would like to go next? Mary?
Go ahead, yeah, hi. Yeah, Dan, we used some dogs in our book too, which was a lot of fun. And I think a lot of people do, but I look forward to reading your book. Actually, my mother wrote, in terms of inspiration, my mother wrote and published 8 books, mysteries. They all take place in New York City after the age of 60. So I think I just always, at that point, I was in medical school and residency, and she would often call me with questions about how does somebody die of such and such a poisoning in 1920, or how do you treat congestive heart failure in the 1800s? So I think I always had kind of murder mysteries just milling around in my brain, but that and just the fact that my co-author said, well, let's do it, and we did. So that's it.
Yes, the co-writer will agree with you. Perfect.
So I'll jump in here. You can't really see my hand. The color is not there. When the Paper Lantern writers, we all write different genres, subgenres, right? We're women's fiction, mystery, romance. They're all different types of historical fiction. And so we wanted to put together something that drew us all together and made us all kind of unified. And so when we were trying to figure out how to take 8 stories that spanned 7 centuries and were all these different genres, we had to find a way to tie them together. And so we came up with this chest that sort of travels through all of our stories. And it is kind of interesting because sometimes the chest is an important part of the story and sometimes it's not. It's just kind of there in the background, but every story has it in there. And we've gotten very good feedback, but it was very inspiring to try and write with a group of people or coordinating with a group of people.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. It was fun to read too. Would anybody else on the panel like to answer that question? What inspired your book?
Yeah, I can go. I already shared a little bit, but or before I say anything, thank you, Peggy, for reading my book. I'm honored. I'm always honored when I hear that someone's read my book. But yeah, so inspiration for writing The Glitch. The main one is just like, since I'm an engineering student, and as I've taken more classes about coding or circuits, physics, I found that engineers often have this very specific view of the world, that the world is like a collection of finite resources that you should harness in order to create the lowest cost, the fastest, the most efficient solution. And in a lot of ways that has gotten our society far. You know, we like to be able to move fast and build new things. But I also wondered if there was value in things that couldn't be quote unquote useful in a technical or capitalist sense. Yeah.
Thank you. So it looks like Bruce is back in, but we need to make him a panelist. Oh, perfect. Okay, there he is. Bruce, are you able to tell us about your work? I know he's coming. Okay, while we're waiting, I want to touch on Jennifer Nunez's question from the audience. And when Bruce joins us, he could describe that as part of his answer. Did you know you wanted to write the genre that you do, or did you stumble upon it? So if somebody would like to.
I can jump in here because I kind of stumbled on it because my stories, my novels, and then this short story is part of it, was based on stories my grandmother told me when I was a young girl. She told me about these fabulous ancestors that were related to and how they were, you know, pioneer California, and they worked for the vote and they did this and that. And I got so inspired, I wanted to write their stories. So when I came to researching them, I just didn't know enough about their lives to do a biography. And so I ended up with historical fiction. So I make up the parts that I don't know for sure are true.
That's a good approach for sure. Okay, anyone else? Bruce.
Hello.
Hi. So can you tell us about your story and then talk to us about why you chose the genre you did?
Okay. All right. So I'll go back to my intro if I can take a minute to introduce myself. So I am a native of San Jose, a graduate of San Jose State, finished a master's degree there in 1996. More germane to my book, I'm a veteran of 35 years in high-tech companies in Silicon Valley, both in large companies and small. And in 2002, I decided to pursue a dream of being a novelist and started taking workshops at Stanford and eventually got my MFA at Queen's University of Charlotte in 2009. The Cyclone Release is my first novel. It was a finalist in the Blue Moon novel competition, and it just came out about 3 weeks ago on November 15th. It's set in a skyrocketing Silicon Valley startup company during the late 90s tech boom, where my main character, Brendan, loses his wife in a tragic car accident that sends him into a 6-month-long depression. He burns through his savings, quits his job. And so the reader joins him after all of this as he's emerging from this, and he joins this startup as its first technical writer. The story is not a mystery, it's not a romance novel, and it's not a novel of intrigue, but it has all of those elements in it. It's a literary novel that explores the need to find belonging in a work and money-obsessed culture like we have here in Silicon Valley. The subtitle of the book is A Novel of Silicon Valley. I chose literary fiction because the answer is actually pretty simple, because it's what I like to read. My favorite authors are Elizabeth Strout, Margaret Atwood, John Updike, authors like that. So that's really why I chose to write literary stories. I also find it's the best way to really sort of explore life challenges and, to explore the human condition in depth. In stories like my novel, The Cyclone Release, which really explores this, this dimension of trying to find belonging in a work-obsessed culture like we have in Silicon Valley, as I mentioned.
Thank you, Bruce. And then just really quickly to circle back, was the need to find belonging like the inspiration for you to write this?
My inspiration was really first and foremost to tell authentic stories of Silicon Valley. I was born here, and actually sort of came of age at the beginning of Silicon Valley. And I feel like Silicon Valley has sort of turned into a caricature in a way. There's all this focus on the youthful billionaires. The newspapers use the term Silicon Valley to refer to 5 companies: Google, Apple, Amazon, which has never been in Silicon Valley, Twitter, which has never been in Silicon Valley, and I forget the 5th one, Facebook, of course. And I just felt like, I felt the need to tell the stories of the people in the trenches who actually make Silicon Valley what it is. True, human stories that are both universal and unique, because of course Silicon Valley is a very unique place, but also, have universal aspects. So that's really my primary inspiration for writing fiction at all. And then the other is, of course, yes, to explore some of the challenges that I've faced in my life and the broader challenges of the human condition.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. And we're so glad that you were able to get back on with us. Thank you. I know it can be a challenge. Okay, for the panel, Jennifer asked a second question, which was, how do you kickstart the creative process? Anybody like to share?
Could you repeat the question? How do you what?
How do you kickstart your creative process?
Kickstart. Okay. I'll just say something really briefly. Sometimes for me, it all comes from an idea that I know, and maybe the other authors have the same type of thing. You have an idea for a story, a novel, it could be unique. One of the others, I think it was Lily, who said, tell a story that hasn't been told before. That's very, very difficult. If you ask James Patterson, he'll say everything's been written already for the most part. You just have to put your own take on it. But for me, sometimes I'll just get an idea and I'll whip out my iPhone, or if you have an iPad or whatever, you type in the general idea with, a couple of sentences, and I'll be walking my dog, for example. I'll type it in and I'll save it, because I know 5 minutes later I'll forget the idea. And then I'll take, I'll later that day or the next day or something like that, I'll try to flesh out where the idea is going. I'll ask myself the question, is this going to be a short story? Is this a novella? Is this going to be a novel? How far do I want to take that? Because I've written a lot of short stories that I've submitted as well that were just short ideas. And I took a short story that I originally had as a short story, and I turned it into a 72,000 word novel. That'll be the next one that I release next year. But just once you get an inspiration for an idea, jot it down as quickly as possible. You may come back to it a few months later and say, that's stupid. I can't go, I really, or I'm not ready to write anything like that. But I would say, get as many ideas as down as you possibly can. I have more ideas than I know what to do with for the rest of my life. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dan. Bruce, do you have something you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would second what Dan said. I have a file full of terrible ideas because I wrote them all down, when I had them, and looking back on them, they're not so great after all. But I really feel like most writers are kind of writing all the time. The inspiration can come from just about anything. And the challenge is really in kind of the difference between, you can look across a coffee shop and the way someone is sitting or the way two people are interacting, that can be enough for me to get my imagination going and start developing a story around that. The challenge, I think, is, how do you then take that the next step and get seated at your computer and start generating sentences and paragraphs? And I think that's discipline and study, and frankly, a lot of reading. Is I think the core of it all.
Thank you. Okay, I've just been given the notice that we need to keep it brief. So one more question, if you all could just speak to it for about a minute. What advice do you have for beginning writers in your genre?
I can keep that nice and brief. Okay, persevere, because it's going to get hard. It's hard to write it. It's hard to publish it. It's hard to market it. Just persevere. Keep at it.
Yeah, I would second that. What I was going to say is write every day. Even if it's, like I said, a note, challenge yourself. One of the things I started doing was I started writing short stories and submitting them, getting my exposure out there to contests and, getting feedback from that. And I actually got, I got best in category. I got an honorable mention. It's like, wow, I didn't think it was that great myself, but then hearing back, it encourages you. Right, like I said, write down an idea, flesh it out. James Patterson, I get a lot of inspiration from James Patterson. I haven't read many of his novels, but he says something, he basically writes, he could write 10, 20, 70 pages, and that's his outline. He hasn't even started his novel yet. I would say write as much as your outline as you can, and then the novel itself will just flow from that. And that's what really helps me.
Thank you. Mary?
Yeah, I agree with everything the panelists have been saying about inspiration. And in terms of writing a mystery, a murder mystery, I'm really glad that I joined Mystery Writers of America, and the Northern California chapter has a great number of resources and support, and kind of helps get you out there. So I would certainly recommend, for anybody who's writing mysteries, especially murder mysteries, to think about Mystery Writers of America.
Thank you, Mary. And I wanted to ask Grace, somebody's asked you a question from the audience. So you have a two-part question. Bruce, go ahead and answer. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. Just quickly. I mean, I would second, brace yourself for a lot of rejection in literary fiction specifically. All the money and most of the readers are all in the other genres, sci-fi, mystery, etc. So, brace yourself for operating in a very small community.
Thank you. All excellent advice. Thank you so much. So Grace, I would like you to answer that question, but then Andy wants to know, you're young, most EE majors write code, they don't write essays. So he wants to know, or they want to know, do most CE majors year round load writing other than algorithms? So you could answer whatever, quick question, whatever comes first to your mind.
Wait, the question was, do most EE students like writing, or?
Well, I think they want to know, do they load writing?
Oh, do they load
other
writing?
than algorithms?
Okay, interesting. Before I forget, the first thing, advice to new writers, in addition to the persevere advice, which I totally number one, the second advice I would give is remember to keep reading, because reading as I'm writing a book helps me remember why I'm writing, just like the enjoyment, the sort of like brain stretching, the all the joys of reading books reminds me why I want to write a book, gives me a motivation to write a book. And yeah, it's just inspiration. But to answer the question about engineering students writing, yeah, most engineering students don't like to write. I would say I am in the minority. One of the reasons why I wanted to write a book actually is because I miss writing, because in my college career, I haven't had to write really any essays at all. And I miss having that creative, just really, it's almost like exercising a different part of my brain. And that really completes me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Grace. Which just goes to show, as evidenced by so many of our writers who've had other careers, and yet they've still written, either during their writing time as teachers or now in their second careers. So I just want to say thank you so much for all our authors today. It's been such a pleasure to have you come and share your writing and your experiences with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Peggy.
Thank you.
All right, and we have, before we close out today, I just want to thank everybody one more time. We have a couple of authors here that have donated copies of their book that were not able to participate today. So Richard Bothello has a new book called The Full Extent, an inquiry into reality and destiny. And this book examines the physical realm and its immaterial base, the possibility of different levels of reality, our potential for the colonization of space, and the true purpose of human existence. And so he has a new book. He's donated copies to the library, and you can get them here if you're interested. The other author is Kekoli G. Kekoli, her new book is called My Life in Kappa, and it's an in-depth look at the history of tea and its origins in India. She's the author of 2 fiction books as well, The Ambrosial Hour and Devi and the Enchantress. She's the co-founder of a specialty tea venture called Tea Monk. She loves to travel and loves to write, and she'll write her thoughts down in anything that catches her fancy. So we appreciate both of their contributions to the program as well. If we can go to the next slide, please. Skip this one. Sorry, we don't have time for the video, unfortunately. I want to thank all of the authors here today for participating. We appreciate you all for taking the time to come and talk to us and pass along, your wisdom and insight to all of the prospective authors out there, because that's what this is really about, highlighting local talent. And I'm always amazed to see how much local talent that we do have here in San Jose. It's quite amazing to see. So thank you all once again. Next slide. Of course, we need to thank the coordinating committee for LocalLit 2022. I want to say thank you to the SJSU librarians, Peggy Cabrera and Essie Barosa Ramirez, for moderating the panels. I want to thank our volunteer, Tony Lowe, who has been controlling some things in the background for us and helping out. SJPL librarian Natasha Lowell for keeping us on track, helping with the slides. And also a shout out to the SJPL and SJSU marketing teams. And I think also don't want to forget Bill for moderating that second panel. He is a librarian with the San Jose Public Library here at the King Library. I am Kyle Burkett, and it has been fun today to hear all the discussion. And last of all, we want to thank everyone for watching and asking the questions that you've asked. And thank you for supporting local authors. If you have a minute, we really would appreciate your feedback. You can use the QR code on the screen to fill out a short survey for us and just kind of let us know how we're doing. This has been LocalLit 2022. Thank you all very much. And with that, we shall call it. So you all have yourselves a great weekend. Thank you.